Need to unmute myself. Thank you, Val. Welcome, everyone. This is Get Your Bearings, using relationships and data to understand your unique campus. My name is Cassandra Kahns, and I am a scholarly communications librarian at Embry-Riddle Aeronautical University. And what this presentation is really my experience as a new librarian, a new hire, and a new OER advocate, trying to get my feet under me as I took on developing the new OER initiative for 2 different campuses. So very quickly, I'm going to introduce my university and our OER initiative that I head up. And then I'm going to talk about the general framework I created for myself in order to understand my position in the university and how I could best serve the 2 campuses that I support. And then we'll look at each campus, how I looked at different information sources, and what that led to on the ground in terms of my advocacy. And we're looking at each one as a case study because they do operate very differently, even as I applied the same sort of questions to each campus. And then we'll sort of wrap up with questions for you to consider about your own campus. Although this presentation is very much the context that I am in and the experiences I have had, I think these questions will help you frame what I've discussed in a way that may help you apply it to your own campus. So, as I said, I work for Embry-Riddle Aeronautical University. As you may expect, we are a STEM-focused institution, particularly on aviation and aerospace. We are a private institution, and we have degrees that range from professional certificates all the way up through the doctoral level. And the way our university is arranged is somewhat unique. We have 2 libraries that serve 3 different campuses. Hazy Library serves our Prescott, Arizona campus, and I have a colleague who handles OER out there. And then I am housed at the Hunt Library in Daytona Beach, Florida. Hunt Library supports our Daytona Beach residential campus and our worldwide campus. And we call it a campus, but worldwide is actually a network of small satellite campuses located around the world. Our biggest one is in Singapore. We have plenty on lots of different US military bases. They truly are global, plus our fully online programs. So I lead what we now call the Open and Affordable Textbook Initiative for both Daytona Beach and worldwide because it's housed in Hunt Library. And it began in 2017 as a grassroots support effort with our OER committee and other support across campus. And eventually that support grew to the point that a dedicated position was created in 2019, which is when I came on board. And when I came on board, I was entirely new. I had just graduated with my library degree, and I was tackling an initiative that didn't have a lot of structure to it yet, so I had a blank slate to work with. As you can see in my bar graph here, the year where it was just the grassroots support versus the year that I was able to dedicate my time and my commitment to our OER initiative has had great response from our faculty. We've had a lot of growth, and I'm expecting this growth to continue as I work more and more with our worldwide campus and sustain my work with our Daytona Beach campus. But like I said, when I began, I was a brand new librarian. I had never worked professionally with OER. My background was in interlibrary loan mostly. And I had to figure out how to tackle basically a blank slate for our OER initiative. And so I started with these very basic questions to get my feet under me. And the first thing that I always start with any project is, what do I have for resources and what do I not have for resources? Because for me, that will tell me the limits of what I can do and where my strengths are for that project. So I knew from the beginning I had time I could dedicate to what I was doing because it was a full-time position. And I understand not everyone has that luxury. I also knew I had support both within the library and from our upper administration, so I didn't have to spend a lot of time convincing people that OER was important. And I knew that there was some structure in place already. We already had the OER committee, which is a cross-campus committee, so we had a foothold in different places on the Daytona Beach campus. And we had our institutional repository, which I can use as a form of publishing and hosting platform for our faculty. Now, what I do not have is money. We have no dedicated funds. And I don't have, when I started, I didn't have a lot of experience because I was brand new. So I had a lot that I needed to learn. So once I figured out what I had and what I didn't have and what I needed to get, the next question I had was, what do I need to know to properly support my campuses and successfully support my campuses? And it came down to some very basic questions for me. Who are our students? Who are our faculty? And what is their relationship with their textbooks? If my job was to go in and offer alternatives and help them create alternatives for their textbooks, I needed to understand how they were actually using them, what was negotiable, what wasn't working, and what they absolutely needed their textbooks to do in the classroom. And although these questions are basic, it was a little difficult to know, well, how do I actually find this information? And for me, it came down to a very holistic approach, which is how I approach most things in general, but particularly with my job. And I found a combination of hard statistics and interpersonal understanding was really important, because hard statistics will give you that broad overview of trends that are going on and things about your student body in general that people don't see in their day-to-day work. But working with people, you're going to get all those little tidbits that data glosses over. So people are going to be able to tell you, oh, this department is interested, but don't talk to them in April. That's when their symposium is. No one has time. Or they'll know what professors are already working on these projects themselves and can point you in the right direction. So by using both, I was able to construct a really holistic view of what our campuses were, what they needed, and what I could do for them in terms of the OER initiative. So we'll start with Daytona Beach, and I apologize, I don't normally like to be this text heavy, but it's hard to avoid in this case. We'll start with Daytona Beach because that is the first campus that I worked with. And I started with students because we're here for student success first and foremost. And I started with the very basic demographics data that pretty much everyone can get access to publicly or within the campus structure. And although it seems basic, I found this very helpful for breaking my own assumptions about who our students were. My background is very much in the liberal arts, and so I had assumed certain things about the gender breakdown of our students, about what programs were going to be more popular, and what the concerns were. And by looking at the demographics, I very quickly saw my assumptions were wrong, and I could start learning for myself what was actually in front of me. The other area that was very useful for learning about students was the OER committee. They predated me, and I could use them as a way to get in touch with the SGA. I could use them as a way to tap into student surveys to learn what students were actually concerned about and not what I assumed they were concerned about. And what I learned is that Daytona Beach is mostly undergraduate, though we do have our graduate level programs as well. But we have a fairly non-traditional population. We're heavily skewed towards male students, but we also have a very large international student population, and we have a very large military affiliate population, both in ROTC officers in training, veteran students who are now coming for their education, or students who are family members of servicemen. And what I also learned is that not only do we have a slightly older, non-traditional population, but that the programs that are most popular for our students also have hidden costs that don't relate to textbooks. So our flight students pay very expensive fees to get their pilot's licenses. Our maintenance students and our engineering students pay very expensive prices for their toolkits. And these are things that don't fall under my purview, but tell me where I can be making more impact when it comes to those students' lives. Now, faculty was a little more complicated. We don't have demographics like we do for students. So I set up in the first 6 months or so a series of very casual meetings over coffee, where I just asked the faculty, tell me about your department. How do you pick your textbooks? How do you think the library can help with your textbooks? And I let them talk. If there's one thing you can find a way to implement, I highly suggest this. If you come in with an open mind and you just let them talk, you will learn very quickly what faculty are already doing this work on your campus, what departments have hesitations, what the concerns are between departments, because it does vary. And just meeting those people, building those relationships, and letting them tell me what they needed was incredibly useful to understand where to get started. I also joined the retention committee, which put me in contact with a lot of people I don't normally work with in my day-to-day. So student services and admissions and advising, which gave me a much broader view at the concerns of what faculty are, and also let me learn things I wouldn't find out within the library. For example, it was in the retention committee that I found out that a third of our faculty used Canvas, our LMS, and 2/3 did not at the time. This is obviously pre-COVID. And And that vastly changed how I presented OER to our faculty. I had been presenting it as a convenient way to get the textbooks to students because you could put it into the LMS, not realizing that 2/3 of my audience weren't even using the LMS at the time. And those are the kind of things that are hard to find outside of asking questions and having these conversations. But ultimately, what I learned about our faculty is that they were mostly full-time. They were highly engaged with their students and what their students needed, and that many of them were already creating content because we teach very specialized topics at Embry-Riddle, and textbooks were already failing to meet their needs. So our faculty were used to creating content, and some had already published it through our institutional repository. And lastly, textbooks. I did learn a lot about our textbooks just from those conversations with faculty, but I also leveraged other information that was available to me. I asked questions of our ILL staff, I asked questions about our course reserves and our reference statistics to see what textbooks are constantly asked about, what classes are constantly a concern. And I started collecting my own data in-house to get a sense of these high impact courses I could be targeting first. And some of the concerns that came up was students struggling to pay for those homework systems, even though faculty were very attached to them. Concerns about the specialty of our topics. Our faculty worried that OER wouldn't exist for their topics, but they also struggled with traditional textbooks meeting their topics. And I also realized that OER knowledge, beyond the fact that they're free, was very limited. So Creative Commons and the other benefits of using OER really wasn't in our faculty members' wheelhouse yet. So what this looks like on the ground for me in my day-to-day is that my work is focused on a departmental level to meet those unique needs of each program and with faculty one-on-one. On Daytona Beach, my role is much more reference, where I'm answering questions and helping lead them towards what they need. I'm also spending more time encouraging faculty to publish and adapt in order to meet their needs, rather than expecting there to be turnkey OER for them. Because our campus subjects don't support that, and the OER world needs our faculty's expertise. I'm also expecting smaller grassroots growth as we go, because I am working on a much smaller scale for Daytona Beach. And my teaching opportunities with them are in these one-on-one conversations with faculty or on departmental level with webinars and department meetings that I get invited to where I can answer their questions directly. Now, Worldwide is an entirely different beast. And even though I approached Worldwide with the exact same framework that I approached Daytona Beach with, my answers were very different, and the work I do with Worldwide is very different. So for students, I began once again with that demographics data, and it did in some ways break up my assumptions again, because when I moved to Worldwide, I assumed the students would be more like our Daytona Beach students. And I also talked to our research department. The library research department does all of the reference work for the Worldwide students. And outside of the Worldwide staff themselves, they have a ton of one-on-one time with the students, seeing what they need, seeing what they struggle with in terms of their books and in terms of access. And what I learned is that Worldwide has many working adults. It's also a lot of active military posted around the world. And that access issues are a much bigger deal for our Worldwide students. If you have a faculty member using free materials on YouTube, that's fine when they're in the US, but a student in another country may not be able to access that same free resource. Or students who are on active military bases may not be able to access all of our library materials because of the stipulations or the firewall inherent to where they are trying to access. And those issues become very important very quickly when we're trying to help faculty find information that they can use in all of their courses, no matter where the student is logging on. And to learn more about our faculty was also a little more difficult because I couldn't walk into their offices like I can in Daytona Beach. So I relied on the relationships that already existed with our liaison librarians. They have years of experience already working with Worldwide, and they know what departments have special concerns and special difficulties, and they could tell me a lot faster than me trying to dig into the website and find that information myself. I also realized that we needed to meet with the instructional design team because they work on every single class with Worldwide. So much like my meetings where I asked them to tell me about your department, I met with the instructional design team and asked them to tell me about the process, tell me how you choose textbooks for courses, and what we can do to help with that process. And we learned very quickly that courses are shaped by small groups of faculty and designers on a 2-year cycle, which is very different from Daytona Beach. And that's done so that courses are consistent when an adjunct has to teach it to meet demand. But that also means that there's different concerns about what materials are used in those courses, and the concerns have to be agreed upon for the whole team and not just the individual faculty member. So the other thing I made sure to do is I attend kickoff meetings for course redesigns, or I schedule meetings very early so that I can talk to the faculty myself, get to know them, and answer their questions about open licensing and OER and what the difference is if they're using a library material or an open material on the internet. And this is important because there's a huge amount of work and a huge amount of faculty I can be working with. Worldwide redesigns about 100 courses a year. So I'm never lacking for work with Worldwide, but I have to maintain expectations of what we can do to properly support them. And for the textbooks, the initial meetings are a great resource because I'm talking and asking direct questions about specific courses. But Worldwide also maintains a master textbook list, and I spent some time just looking over that textbook list to see trends in how expensive books tend to be, what non-textbook resources are required of our students, and how often things like homework systems are required, because those are hard to replicate in an OER setting. Not impossible, but more difficult. And what I learned is that the concerns for Worldwide center much more on longevity because of those 2-year redesign cycles, and also, longevity and stability, because they don't want things disappearing off the internet for their students, which is where I could step in and provide that stability through our institutional repository. They're also much more interested in interactive and multimedia content, and they create much more of that content. So when I'm helping Worldwide faculty publish, I'm focused on videos and assignments and smaller objects versus supplements and full textbooks for Daytona Beach. And on the ground, this looks very different for Worldwide as well. I'm not working with departments, I'm not working with colleges, I'm working with the instructional design team first and foremost, and faculty in those one-on-one course redesigns. And instead of acting as a reference librarian, I'm inserting the library into that course redesign process and really acting as an OER subject specialist to add to that team rather than just as a library liaison. And instead of that slow grassroots growth that I expect from Daytona Beach, we have exploding growth in Worldwide because there is so much demand for what we're doing, and it needs to be structured so it meets the fact that there's only one of me. And lastly, for learning opportunities, our faculty are around the world. I'm currently working with one in Ireland. We're doing more work with Singapore. I can't do webinars in the same way that I do for Daytona Beach, so self-guided learning opportunities are what I'm developing for our designers and for our faculty to help meet those needs. Now, like I said, I started with very similar questions and ended up at very different results for both campuses. So I'm going to go back to some of those questions to help you sort of stop and think about your own campus. And I think these questions are important if you're brand new, like I was, or if you are established, because it's easy to think you know your campus and stop taking stock of where you are and where your initiative is. So it's sometimes good to just stop, get back to basics, and really understand where you're at. So some things to consider is, what resources do you have and what do you not have? For me, I never did stipends because I knew we didn't have consistent funds that we could put towards this, but I had time. So I focused on one-on-one hands-on support in lieu of being able to pay, because I could at least provide specialized assistance rather than sending our faculty out themselves. You may not have time, so you'll want to focus on things where you can talk to larger groups of faculty rather than one-on-one like I'm able to do. And knowing your resources helps frame what you do. And then, what do you know about your campus and what are you assuming about your campus? Because especially if you're like me and you work in an office in the library, you may not actually know what's going on campus. So it's good to really check your own assumptions about your students. And then of course, how can you learn more? Are there committees you can join? Are there students that you can pull? Are there resources you haven't tapped into or questions you haven't asked? And lastly, how can what you learn translate into action? I love learning for learning's sake, but this is about the students and student success. So everything I learn, I try to leverage into making our initiative better and stronger and more aligned with our ultimate goals. All right, thank you for letting me talk very fast for 20 minutes. Does anyone have any questions? Oh, it looks like we have a couple in the chat. Someone's asking how I got into OER and Schoolcom. So I was graduating library school. I was going to be moving to a different part of the state with my husband, and everyone I worked with kept sending me this job description saying this sounded exactly like me. So getting into Schoolcom was a little bit accidental, though I did fall very much in love with it. I was already interested in OER because I'm a self-confessed copyright nerd, and open licensing is really interesting to me. And OER fits really well into that. Having just been a student as well, it hits very close to home because I was just shelling out hundreds of dollars I didn't have on textbooks myself, and I was very compassionate towards the difficulty that creates for students. To answer Margaret's question, I'm going to post the slides, yes. I don't currently have one, but I can get one sent out. We do use surveys, Erica. We're currently in the middle of a multi-semester survey research project for students, and we're doing interviews with faculty members. The OER committee has done more ad hoc surveys in the past to ask our students questions, and our SGA regularly does small 3-question surveys of our students as well. Kristen, I have not done coffee dates with university administrators, partially because they're impossible to get time with, and 2, because I already knew I had their support. I knew support was inconsistent between departments, so that's where I wanted to start. If you can, I would definitely talk to who's in charge of retention or CTLE, so Center for Teaching and Learning. Those are great people to get you in contact with higher ups, in my opinion, because they tend to know a lot of people on campus. Stephen, what kind of pushback or lack of response did I get? A couple faculty just never responded when I tried to set up meetings. I think I reached out to 10, I got responses from 8. So not a bad batting average, but a couple just never responded. I only had major pushback from one faculty member who just really drilled me with questions about the business side of OER and what was it going to do to our campus if we were giving away our content for free, and does it matter if we can't get students to read the textbook anyway? And by the time we got to the end of the conversation, I realized he was actually on board. He just wanted to know that I could back up what we were promising we could do. And that's part of the reason I kept those conversations very open, is because I wanted that pushback. I want those hard conversations so I can actually answer those misconceptions as best as I can. But there definitely was a little pushback or just not interest, but less than I expected. For Richard Palmer, what did the instructional designers need from me most? They needed to know where to find things. So I sent them towards our LibGuide and specific repositories I thought would be helpful for them. I think the IDs also needed kind of permission to look outside of this. Sometimes their administration has more pushback on us letting things out to the public, and so they needed that affirmation that this is a thing that is happening in the world. Open ed is growing and important, and so sometimes I can provide them with some support for what they already are inclined to do. Emma, congratulations on your recent MLAS as well. Donna, did you organize all the information you were gathering from your informal meetings and conversations? Yes, I took notebooks with me to every meeting and took a lot of notes. And then I came back and typed them all up into OneNote. So I had a section I could go back and reference. And then I starred things that I thought would lead me to more people or to more ideas that I could follow up on. Melanie, student groups. Yes, I work with SGA. I've presented to the SGA. I now have an SGA member on the OER committee. Other than that, I haven't been able to collaborate with too many. I'm hoping to in the future. We have some books coming up that I think students are going to be more involved with. We have an essay collection coming out that I'm going to be working more one-on-one with students to help them understand what they're doing, and in that way, hopefully get them more involved in the process. Yes, Stacy, you have permission to use this. I think these will be recorded, correct, Valerie, and made available?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, the slides will be available and the recording. Yes.
Okay, perfect. Try to see if there's more questions in here. Everyone's very supportive, and I appreciate that. Ricardo, as a student, how can you get started? As a student, I would say see if you can find out who's doing this work on your campus, because that has been one of the most difficult things for me is how do I get the students more aware of what we're doing? Faculty are easy. I can trap them in meetings or faculty senate. Students are harder. So if you're a student and you're interested, see if there is an OER committee, see if you can join it, or just talk to your faculty. Say, do you know if this is going on? Have you thought about this? Our star student member of the OER committee when I was hired has very sadly graduated. But he probably got us more faculty involved than anyone because he just talked to them. It's like, hey, did you know this is happening? Did you know they're spending 150 on your textbook and that we can change that? I don't expect all students to be that aggressive, but he was fantastic as an advocate. And having students really speak up that it matters to them, I think does speak to faculty. Because me coming and saying it's important from the library is one thing. Having a student come and say, this really matters in our day-to-day is a very different impact for faculty, especially if you're in their class.
I think we are at time, just a smidge over, Cassandra, but thank you so much for the presentation. Everyone is welcome to stay on longer if you have additional questions, but at this point, I'm going to stop the recording.
Thank you, Val.
And you can stay on till 20 minutes till. Thank you.
Yes, and thank